Today is Good Friday. And as we celebrate Good Friday, we'll be reading some of the Easter events. You recall when we left off, the crucifixion was over, and Jesus' body had been taken by Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus to the tomb. And Vinegar Boy had returned home to Nicholas after an exhausting day. So we pick it up there, and let me show you. We start part 2 of the book. So we move into a new section with chapter 17. Sparrow teetered on the window ledge outside the half-closed shutters and sang. It was the first day of the week, very early in the morning. He is risen, he is risen. Vinegar Boy rolled over on his pallet of blankets, opened his eyes, and stretched. He was still sore in spots, but the raw places on his heels and toes had dried and darkened until they looked like new copper coins against the tan of his feet. He rose quickly and ran to the window. He had dreamed that Sparrow was singing out words to him as he slept. The shutters swung wide and the bird hovered on whistling wings. The boy could feel the stir of happiness in the air. Sunlight danced on stone and beamed across the holy city. "What is it, Sparrow? Why is the world so full of joy and gladness this morning?" Sparrow fluttered, flipped, and floated. Over and around, off and on the window ledge he soared, riding the shutters as if he were a caged bird swinging in the gardens of the rich. In the nest in the eaves above him, his dark brown mate and the little ones with their featherless necks chirped in chorus. They seemed to sing, "He is risen, he is risen." Vinegar Boy leaned out the window. He could not see field or garden. His eyes saw no green at all, except a small wooden tub of geraniums under the arches of the barracks, where a homesick recruit had planted flowers such as had grown in his mother's garden. The very air was filled with music. The song of rejoicing came from the cucumber patches with their running vines, and from the onion beds with their dancing stalks, from the hop fields where the new cuttings were taking root after the storm had washed out the first planting. The music came from the olive groves and the orchards, from the pomegranate trees and the flowering apricots, from the wild roses in the flax fields and the lilies blooming amid the tall grass of the wayside. What was the message of this song? It seemed to be, "He is risen, he is risen." The sunlight warmed the boy's body, and his whole being throbbed in answer to the song he could not understand. Surely the hills about Jerusalem were skipping like little lambs, and the trees of the forests were clapping their hands in joy. From behind him came the sound of running feet. Someone was taking the stone stairs 2 steps at a time. Marconius burst into the room, wearing only short trousers and a military tunic. His black hair curled about his forehead. He had not yet shaved, and his face, what part was not shining with jubilance, was dark with beard. Behind him, Nicholas climbed more slowly, breathing hard. He watched as Marconius grabbed the boy and swung him high. "He has risen, boy! He has risen!" The words fit Sparrow's song, and the boy suddenly knew why the earth was bursting with gladness. Jesus of Nazareth had risen from the dead. "Come on, get dressed," Marconius said. "We're going to the garden to see for ourselves if the story the guards are telling is true." "Oh, it is true," Vinegar Boy said. "Can't you feel it? Even Sparrow knows it is true." As Nicholas helped Vinegar Boy dress, Marconius told them what he had heard. He told them of the uproar at the palace as Pilate interrogated the priests and the guards. He told of the panic in the courts of the Jewish rulers as the Sanhedrin showed signs of falling apart. Many of the counselors, like Joseph and Nicodemus, could no longer deny their faith in Jesus as the Messiah of Israel. The boy fastened his own sandals. The boots he had worn on the day of sadness had been laid away in the small chest that Nicholas had made for him. The chest, made of cedar wood, stood near the window under the shelf where the bag of grain was kept. But Marconius was going on. "The rulers are paying the guards to be silent about the truth. It is to be rumored that his friends stole the body away, but it is not so. I have questioned them. The detail that was ordered out to watch the tomb has come in. The men were white and shaken. Sight has not yet come back fully into their eyes. There was a light fiercer than desert sunlight, sharper than a lightning flash, they said, and the stone in front of the tomb became as parchment, the seal as wax. Jesus came forth, no stripes upon him, his beard full, his garments white, white as rain-cleansed clouds, and the earth shook as he came forth. The stone rolled back, and the light that surrounded him conquered the darkness of the grave. The watchers admit that they fell as dead men before his glory. Nicholas listened, his face serious, but his blue eyes glowing. You are certain it is the same man who lives again? He lives. He lives. I will take the boy with me to the garden. He deserves to see for himself. And then Nicholas paused. A look passed between the two men. Then we will find him, Marconius said. A white Arabian mare, which Marconius had chosen after the death of the gray stallion, stood ready for them as they came out into the gentle light of dawn. They passed from the city gates and broke into a canter. 3 days before, the highway north had been a road of sorrow and sadness for the boy. Now the sun danced, trailing her morning scarves across the lawns and hedges. The air was fresh with flower scents. In the sky, the blue stretched and stretched as if there could be no end of blueness. In the garden beyond the dark cypress trees, the grave stood empty. Vinegar Boy did not enter the tomb, but Marconius did. The boy stood with his hand on the large round stone that had sealed the grave. The sunlight had warmed it, and it seemed to him that the stone was vibrating with humming. Marconius came back into the sunlight, blinking. The clothes are there that they wound him in, and the napkin that they laid across his head is there, but he is not there. He has risen, as they said. Where is he, Marconius? Can we find him? We will try, and if we do, Nicholas and I will see to it that you receive the favor you deserve. The miracle? He had given up all hopes of a miracle. Even now, when his heart should be jumping with excitement and hope, he was thinking more of Jesus than his own face. Where could Jesus be? Maybe in the village, Marconius, in the little house with the garden where the fisherman took Mary. Perhaps they are still there. It's as good a place as any to begin, Marconius said, laying his heels to the flanks of the mare. The Arabian stretched out into a racing stride. The village stood as cool and quiet as the boy remembered it. The bell on the gate tinkled merrily, but the garden was deserted. The door of the house was closed. Some of the wreckage from the storm had been swept up into piles near the grape arbor, but it had not been carried away. The poppies that had danced in a vivid pattern against the wall were now ruined. The blooms lay dark and dead upon the ground. As they left the garden, the boy turned and swung the bell. The melody set the birds to singing. Listen, it's the sparrow's song. He is risen, he is risen. Marconius did not laugh at his fancy. Just then an old man hobbled from the courtyard on the opposite side of the street. If you're seeking the Galileans, they are not here. They have gone into the city, for they have heard that Jesus, the Lord, has risen. Where in the city? Marconius asked. I do not know. It is a secret place. Then the old man added, how will they feel when he stands among them, those who failed him, those who denied him? Ah, that I were young and strong again and could serve such a master. Where can we find him? Marconius insisted gently. The old man leaned down and plucked a cluster of small white flowers. Bell-shaped and fragrant, the blossoms swung on a slender stem between broad green leaves that shone in the sunlight as if they had been freshly oiled. For your mother, he told the boy. Today should be a day of flowers for mothers in praise of the maiden who gave him suck. Our Lord has conquered death, centurion, and we who trust shall also rise. Is it not so? There was no fear in the old man's face that spoke of death, although the boy knew that death could not be too many days away. Marconius gripped the trembling hand. It's true, old friend. It's true. The wizened old face squinted up at Marconius, and the boy wondered how the old man had known that he was a centurion. but the old were always wiser than the young. "You are not an Israelite, my friend," the old man said, "and for a while it will be with you as with the sheep of another pasture, or the olives that grow wild outside the grove. But there will come a time when you will be accepted, when you shall be grafted to the stem of Jesse." Vinegar Boy thought the old man was rambling, but Marconius listened closely with respect. "There is a sign in your temple that says, 'This far and no farther' for a Gentile, but I have heard that he said that whosoever wished to come to him would not be cast aside." The old head bobbed. The shaking hand fell to his side. "Peace ride with you." Marconius slapped the reins against the mare's neck, and they were off again. Later, as they were entering the city, they passed a beggar woman. Marconius turned and spoke over his shoulder. "I came without my purse." But the boy nudged him to stop. He leaned over and pressed the white flower into the waiting hand. "We have no money, but here's a gift for you." She muttered under her breath, but as the fragrance of the flowers reached her, she lifted the cool cluster against her wrinkled cheek. The boy smiled. "Have you heard? The Lord has risen." A smile began on her face and gave her a touch of beauty. As the white mare moved on, the boy looked back. Her fingers were fondling the petals, and her eyes followed them. The smile was still there. He waved, then he said, "Marconius, we must begin to tell everyone that the Lord has risen." The next day, Marconius came to the commissary. "I have heard that Jesus intends to meet with his disciples and friends somewhere in Galilee. I intend to seek them out. Arno has taken command for the next month. I'm going to find the Galileans, and then I will send for you." "But Marconius, I can't leave here and go into Galilee. The work in the hop fields is increasing." "We'll see about that," Nicholas said. "If you find him, Marconius, do you think there will be more miracles? Or will these days see the beginning of something new?" "I don't know, Nicholas. I am as a babe in the faith, but I intend to grow." "But will they teach you?" Vinegar Boy asked. "The old man said that I am not of their pasture," Marconius interrupted. "That is so, but he who forgave his enemies and welcomed a thief into his kingdom will not turn his back on me. Neither will he forget what you have done for him, boy, the way you helped his mother and the other women." And then Marconius told them of Magdalene. He had heard that it was the red-haired woman who had first beheld the risen Jesus. He appeared to her before any other. She came later with other women to the tomb, and they found two men in white, one sitting at the head, the other at the foot. And the men asked them why they were seeking Jesus among the dead. "He is not here, he is risen," they said. As Marconius spoke, the boy could see the angels, and he suddenly knew that was the blessing that Jesus had bestowed upon the fiery Magdalene. She had seen him first. That evening, the centurion hung his saddlebags across the white mare and departed from Jerusalem for Galilee. Vinegar Boy watched through tears as he went. Would Marconius return soon? Would he send back word concerning Jesus as he had promised? Nicholas put his arm about him and pressed him close. "He will return. He has promised to be a witness for us when we appear before the judge." That was all Nicholas said. It was the first time he had mentioned the adoption since the day of sadness. But the love and longing were there, and the boy knew that he could not deny Nicholas any longer. He must choose a name. The birthmark was still there, but it did not bother him so much. When he felt sorry for himself, he thought of Jesus. He had been called much worse names than Liverface, and yet he had continued to be kind. As Vinegar Boy thought upon a name, he knew what name he wished to use, what kind of man he wished to be. But first he must ask the one who owned the name. A person doesn't just borrow another's name without asking. Chapter 18. Several days after the resurrection of Jesus, Nicodemus came to the commissary to settle for the price of the aloes. Vinegar Boy had been returning from the gardens with a bag of early peas when he saw the man with the billowing black and yellow robes asking directions from a porter near the palace gates. He ran to tell Nicholas, knowing the steward would want to take off his work apron and put on a clean cap. Nicholas greeted the counselor with dignity and honor. Vinegar Boy had washed his face and hands and poured the peas into a small basket. He sat cross-legged on the door-sill with a pan for the shelled peas between his knees. At first, as the counselor talked, Nicholas shook his head stubbornly. "The aloes have already been put to my account." But Nicodemus was fluent with words and hands. He must pay for the aloes, and Nicholas must not deny him this chance to right a wrong. He had been afraid to confess his allegiance to the Nazarene. His voice went on, irresistibly persuasive. Finally, Nicholas threw up his heavy arms in surrender. The boy grinned as the pods snapped and the peas rattled into the pan. Nicholas had met his match in this scholarly turtle. Money passed from the counselor to Nicholas. The steward went into the account room and came back with a proper receipt. Then, as they sat at the table, Nicholas poured a cup of fine red juice, and Nicodemus spoke of Jesus as the Messiah of the Jews and the Savior of the world, as he had told the boy he would do. "Freedom, steward," Nicodemus said. "Even with your manumission papers, you have not been free. What man is free until he is free of the penalty and burden of sin? Jesus told us, 'Whosoever commits sin is the servant of sin.' If God's Son therefore shall make you free, ye shall be free indeed." Nicholas listened because the counselor was saying things that the steward had always believed, and he was explaining them in terms that he understood. "You, as an honest steward, must honor the drafts of the governor upon the supplies in your warehouse. So must the Father in heaven henceforth honor the faith of those who draw upon his mercies through the name of his Son." "I have full intentions of believing, counselor, but first God must show me that he intends to recompense my son. I have talked to him about it. If he wishes to have my allegiance, he must do what is right for the boy." Vinegar Boy, sitting quietly shelling peas, felt his face flaming. He had not known that Nicholas had talked to God about him. The sharp black eyes of the counselor burned beneath their heavy lids. "Faith does not come in a barrel, steward, to be opened when you please. You cannot weigh to yourself one portion of faith, great or small. Not so much as a grain of faith will come by a man's own will. Faith is a gift of God." The peas fell quietly, a tiny green mountain forming in the bottom of the pan. A line of perspiration sat on the steward's forehead. He removed the cap. "But if you'd seen the boy that night," his big voice broke. The counselor's black eyes shone clear and thin as candle tips. "He has already received a recompense, steward. Have you not seen that for yourself?" A pod broke sharply under the boy's thumb. What did Nicodemus mean? "The mark no longer plagues him." How did Nicodemus know? But it was true. The birthmark was still there in all its purplish red ugliness, but it did not fill him with unhappiness anymore. Not even Phineas, with his mocking tongue, had been able to spoil his days of gladness since Jesus had risen. When Nicodemus was gone, Vinegar Boy stood before Nicholas with the pan of peas in his hands. "I did not know that you had asked God for a miracle for me." "What father does not desire the best for his son?" "But I want you to believe in Jesus the way Marconius does, even if my cheek isn't changed." Nicholas's chin grew stubborn, the pale blue eyes determined. "I have not minded the mark, boy, but you wish a new cheek, and I will serve no God who is not just and fair enough to see that you have it." Tears swam in the boy's amber eyes. "If he comes back, I will ask him. I've not stopped wanting my face fixed, Nicholas. It's just that the mark does not rub as a blister anymore. Nicodemus is right. I have received a miracle." Nicholas pulled the boy to his lap, and the pan of peas upset. They rolled across the floor. Later, As Phineas passed their door on his way to the meat larder, he saw the steward on his knees playing marbles with the fresh green peas. The boy was opposite him, eagerly engaged in the game. Nicholas was roaring in his big voice, "Knuckle down, boy! Quit hunching!" Vinegar Boy saw the shadow of Phineas upon the floor and looked up at him. "Peace to you, Phineas! The Lord is risen!" The butcher moved on, muttering to himself. The heavy door jarred shut behind him. Nicholas sat back, breathing heavily. "You'll never see a change in that one." "God could do it if he wants to." "Not that one. He has a heart of stone." The boy did not argue. Nicholas might be right. Already it seemed that some would believe in Jesus and some would not, even though he had risen from the dead. The next day, the first of the reports came from Marconius in Galilee. A training unit of raw recruits had been on field maneuvers, brought it in. Marconius had located the main body of believers. He had talked to friends in Capernaum, where a fellow centurion was in the confidence of the Jews. Although he had not yet seen or heard Jesus, there was no doubt that others had. The second note came a little later. Scribbled hurriedly, as if Marconius had written it on his knee, the message arrived with a donkey train delivering a shipment of embroidered cloth to the palace. Nicholas and Vinegar Boy opened it together. Marconius had seen Jesus. He had heard him, even though he had stood afar off. From what he could gather, Jesus did not intend to remain in Galilee. He was planning to return to Bethany, but, and Marconius had underlined the words, he is not staying in Judea either. He is going to return to his Father in heaven. If the boy wishes to see him, he must be in Bethany when the Galileans get there. Rumors are in conflict. I will let you know exactly when to look for him, if possible. Keep your ears open, boy. Be watchful of the Bethany road as you work in the fields. There have been no reports of miracles. As they read the note, Vinegar Boy exclaimed, "Jesus is coming back!" But Nicholas said, "You have one more chance, boy. You must not let it slip through your fingers like a ripened barley grain." "I won't, Nicholas, I won't." His amber eyes glowed, not entirely from the thoughts of the miracle, but because the Galileans were coming back. It would not be long before he had his name.